Welcome to People Doing Good for Others, where we honor and celebrate and praise those who are truly making significant contributions in our communities. I'm Gary York, and I'm grateful to be here and grateful for this opportunity. We want to thank Wilkes Communications and RiverStreet Productions and 100.9 WIFM for this opportunity again. And our featured guest is R.G. Absher. He's an historian, a person of great knowledge, and his specialty is the Revolutionary War and some significant battles that happened, and he's the president of the Over Mountain Victory Trail Association. And good morning to you, dear friend.
Good morning, Gary. It's good to be here.
Thank you for being here. So if we were to talk about your attire today and from whence it came, just tell us a little bit about your interests. Maybe go back first to the Kerr Scott Dam and being a park ranger, and then the first time that you heard about the Victory Trail and how taken you were of it.
Well, back in 1983, I was a park ranger at W. Kerr Scott Reservoir here in Wilkes County, a project that's managed by the Corps of Engineers. And we actually had a section of trail up along Warrior Creek Campground on the reservoir property. And the National Park Service is interested in establishing an on-the-ground section of the Over Mountain Victory National Historic Trail on reservoir lands. And so we met with the government officials from the National Park Service out of Atlanta. And when they were in the office, he said, oh, by the way, and the conversation came up, they knew that I was a musician. He said, bring your instrument tonight and come out and play some around the campfire. So I did, and what that resulted in was that I learned about the story of the Over Mountain Men and the campaign to Kings Mountain from the reenactors who were dressed much like I am today around the campfire that evening. And I was captivated by the story.
Captivated.
I was. It was so interesting, and I realized it was a story that was fairly obscure, that many people were not familiar with.
You want to share it with us now? What is the big picture of the Over Mountain Victory Trail, where it started, where it ended? Give us some of that, R.G.
Well, historically, the Over Mountain Victory National Historic Trail is the trail that was set aside by Congress in 1980 on a bill presented by James T. Broyhill, signed by President Jimmy Carter, on the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Kings Mountain, which was October 7th, 1780. The National Historic Trail is 330 miles in length, and it honors the role and route of the Over Mountain Men and their defeat of the British at the Battle of Kings Mountain. And of course, it retraces the journey that those Over Mountain Men, it's a militia force, which is a volunteer force in the 18th century, that came together much like modern day volunteers from the National Guard would. They essentially were called out in what we call the militia. They came together with their militia commanders, and then they went towards the adversary and called up with him at Kings Mountain.
Now, let's pull in the Elkin area and the Wilkes County area, and then we're going to go on down in the march. Just fill in that for me.
I will. The Over Mountain Victory Trail, National Historic Trail, has two trailheads. One is in Abington, Virginia. The other one is in Elkin, near the current location of Elkin Municipal Park. And that's where the Park Service designation of the Eastern Trailhead officially begins. What really happened historically there in the Elkin area was that Major Joseph Winston, who was bringing his militia from present-day area, I would say Pilot Mountain, in Surrey County, and along the Yadkin River, he came into the Elkin muster field there, which today, of course, is Elkin Park. He encamped, and he had roughly 150 men. And then from that troop movement, after they settled there, they camped there in late September 1780, they continued on down the Yadkin River, where they rendezvoused with Colonel Benjamin Cleveland's men.
Here? Right here?
In the Wilkesboro area, in what was known as Mulberry Fields. Mulberry Fields was what we now call Wilkesboro. And the big bottomlands where corn grows, and where we have the Yadkin River Greenway today, and a lot of industrial businesses down in the old bottomland. But historically, that was known as Mulberry Fields, and it was named that perhaps as far back as when the Moravians came through here in 1752 under Bishop Spagenberg and the Moravian Exploration Party, when they were essentially surveying what is known as the Wachovia Tract. And they noticed that there was a lot of Indian occupation in the area, and they also saw a lot of mulberry groves, and thus the Cherokee word in translation for mulberry fields is the word Kiowa. So the presumptive Indian name of the area may have been Kiowa, in the Cherokee language anyway. But there were Cherokees in the area in the 1750s, and there were also Catawba Indians in the area in the 1750s. And then we had a period in the late 1750s, early 1760s, known as the French and Indian War. After the French and Indian War had died down and peace returned to the Yadkin Valley, settlers began pouring into this region as it was less hostile and there was less of a possibility of a warring Native American attack. But at the same time, there was a growing restlessness happening with respect to the mother country, and that was England. And because a lot of the residents, even this far south, felt like we were not getting a fair shake on representation, and also the amount of influence coming out of the British Crown from across the ocean seemed to be heavy-handed, and word got around how Americans were being treated in cities such as Boston and Philadelphia. And that information eventually trickled into this part of the woods.
So RG, you said November 7th? Was it?
October 7th.
October 7th. Now, the group comes over from Elkin, unites with the group from here?
Yes.
And then they start south. Is that right?
That's correct. And what really motivated the Overmountain
Tell us that.
Was that Lord Charles Cornwallis, who was the commander of the British forces in the South, was camped in what we today call Charlotte, along the Catawba River in modern-day Mecklenburg County. And the reason he was there was that in the previous spring of 1780, the British had shifted their strategy towards a southern strategy, because they had pretty much stalemated after 4 long years of fighting in the north. And essentially, Congress had given Horatio Gates, who was a hero at the Battle of Saratoga, the reins over the American Continental Forces in the South. And he hastily put an army together, marched from Hillsboro into a place called Camden, South Carolina, and went pell-mell into Cornwallis's forces there. And the heat of the August sun and the swampy environment there, and the fact that he took an army, a fatigued army, who were probably suffering the ill effects of eating green apples and molasses. You can imagine what that might benefits or some detrimental effects that might create, into battle and lost the Battle of Camden. Well, it looked like a disastrous effect. That was August 17th, 1780. And after that, it looked like it was really curtains for the American cause. To use a football term, you're fourth and long and deep in your own territory. And the only remaining resistance were the backwoodsmen, those folk living in the backwater sections.
Great marksmen too, right?
And they were good marksmen. They were armed with their Pennsylvanian rifles, which were very good at distance shooting and hunting for small game and larger game such as deer. And so they had honed their skills of Indian fighting, many of them.
Now, how many left Wilkes County, came over from Elkin? How many started south?
We had 350 in the combined forces. of over mountain men with Kings Mountain. That's Joseph Winston and Cleveland's forces combined. And they continued along the Yadkin River through what we call today Lenore, and on down in present-day Morganton. At that particular time and place was known as Quaker Meadows. If you drive into Morganton today, you see all kinds of signs, Quaker Meadows Golf Course, and even the Freedom Patriots is the football team of the Morganton High School.
Oh, okay.
They're in Morganton, and they named them after the Patriots. But that whole area there along the Catawba River was where the two armies met. And that was the army coming out of Abington, Virginia, and the army coming out of
And how many
militia.
militia folk are there at that point?
It's estimated that over 1,200 were there at that point.
Okay.
And this is interesting. They were driven from what Patrick Ferguson, when Cornwallis was stationed at Charlotte, Patrick Ferguson went into a place called Gilberttown. It was a settlement above the present-day town of Rutherford in Rutherford County. And he delivered a message. I can almost hear his Scottish voice, something like this: "If ye do not resist from opposition to British arms, I will march my army over the mountains and hang your leaders with fire and sword." And the dispatch riders on their horses took these messages into settlements, including Wilkes County and including the settlements over the mountain along the Watauga and the Holston and the Nolichucky rivers. Commanders like Isaac Shelby, John Sevier, William Campbell out of Virginia, and of course Winston and Cleveland along the Yadkin River responded. And the end result was this army that amassed together at Quaker Meadows, and they encamped there on September 30th.
Now, Kings Mountain
1780.
is in South Carolina. I thought forever it was in North Carolina, but it's in South
Right,
Carolina.
and Kings Mountain, North Carolina is named because of the heroic Patriot victory that happened at the Battle of Kings Mountain. But the actual battlefield is about 1.5 miles across the South Carolina line, near Blacksburg, South Carolina, the modern town of Blacksburg, South Carolina. What happened from Quaker Meadows is the Over Mountain men began their pursuit of Ferguson. They thought they would find him at Gilberttown in Rutherford County. But there were two men that perhaps had loyalist leanings that were captured, that actually left the Over Mountain men while they were camped at a place called the Shelving Rock in Carter County, present Carter County, Tennessee. And they warned Ferguson that the Over Mountain men were in pursuit. And so Ferguson decided to head back towards Cornwallis. The Over Mountain men fully expected him to be at Gilberttown, and that's where they would have the fight there. But he made his way back towards Cornwallis in late September. And then as he went into South Carolina, he saw this low-lying mountain. It's actually shaped like a human footprint. But the mountain, its terrain was really good for the Over Mountain men because they were used to hunting deer in forest conditions, or back in the French and Indian War, fighting the Native American warring, such as the Shawnee and Cherokee, in the mountains. They were used to guerrilla fighting.
So he chose to go up on the mountain.
He chose the battle site.
The British now, the British.
The British did. And they were a loyalist force too that numbered around maybe 1,000 men. And the end result was, when the Over Mountain men arrived, their strength was about similar to the British loyalist force. They were loyalists too. They were not full-blown what you call British redcoats on the Battle of Kings Mountain. Now, Patrick Ferguson, their leader, was a really good militia commander, and he was very good at recruiting. If he was a college football recruiter, today's standards, you would say, well, he got very able people to fight for him. He was able to get the 5- and 4-star people who were loyal to the king to serve. So he had a good crack army of militia that he had trained personally. And he trained them in the style of European war, that is shoulder-to-shoulder combat, firing volleys with the British smoothbore, and then following that up with the dreaded bayonet charge. And nobody wants to be in an open field facing a bayonet charge when it's coming at you, when opposing armies coming across a trot or maybe even a sprint.
So now
with
the
blade
battle is,
and
you
bladed
told me
flame.
is an hour, only an hour, is that right?
What happened on October 7th, 1780? The Over-Mountain men had left a place called Hannah's Cowpens. Today there was another battle that happened later in a sequence of battles after Kings Mountain at Cowpens, but it was also the encampment place there of the Over-Mountain men. And it's near the present-day location, not too far from Chesney, South Carolina. Well, the Over-Mountain men found out the rough location of Ferguson. They decided to choose out of the 1,200 to 1,500 men that they had that had mastered the campaign, about 1,000 of the best horses and ablest men with the best rifles to continue the chase on horseback after Ferguson, to try to capture him before he got back to Cornwallis, who was encamped and dug in at Charlotte. So what they did that night, they left in a driving rain. They could barely see the horse in front of them, the old accounts say. And the old journals say that they trusted in their God and they kept their powder dry. Really kind of an interesting bit of humor thrown in with the seriousness of the situation. But the next day the sun came out. And about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the Over-Mountain men encircled the battle field there, which was the mountain of Kings Mountain. And the various forces fought Indian style behind rocks and trees, very carefully choosing their targets with the accuracy of their Pennsylvania rifles, also known as the Deckard rifle. And meanwhile, the British would counter with musket fire from their smooth bores and bayonet charges. But when they would charge the Over-Mountain men, for the most part, the Over-Mountain men would disappear in the forest below, hide behind rocks and trees, reload their long rifles, and many of the British Loyalist force were actually shot in the back as they were retreating up the mountain. And after several subsequent charges, which did have a lot of attrition, eventually the losses on the British side were very great. And about maybe 45 minutes into the battle, it's been estimated, Patrick Ferguson saw what was happening. He was riding on his white Arabian horse, slashing through the forest with his sword. He even cut his sword in two on the tree branches. And he was cutting down surrender flags as his men were trying to give up because they were being beaten so badly in the Battle of Kings Mountain. He saw that all was about lost. He got a few of his very best provincials, very best fighting force he had with him, and they tried to breach the Patriot lines. And at that particular time, several of the Over-Mountain men, sharpshooters, found out Ferguson was there. Ironically, Ferguson was not wearing a red coat at the time of the battle, but he chose to wear a checkered hunting shirt. And through spy information, they knew the Over-Mountain men, word had got around that they knew that Ferguson would be dressed in that manner that day. And so several rifle balls entered him about the same time. He fell from his horse, dragged by his stirrup through the woods, through brush and bramble, and lost consciousness and died there. And he had made a proclamation that before the Battle of Kings Mountain, Ferguson said something like this: "Not even God Almighty will remove me from this battlefield." You can see prophetically was proven true. He's buried there today in a Scottish cairn.
R.G.
Yes.
Absher, so that is the turning point of the Revolutionary War. That's what
Historians agree that the Southern Campaign led to Yorktown, Virginia, and the first chain of events, successes, was the Battle of Kings Mountain. And that's even quoted from Thomas Jefferson, who said it was the first tied to the chain of success.
So we have folks from Surrey, Wilkes, and around,
yes, that made the
played a
difference.
key role in the win there at Kings Mountain.
Right, and the dominoes fell pretty rapidly. About 4 months later, the Battle of Cowpens, which was, by the way, the encampment site of the Over-Mountain men the night before the Battle of Kings Mountain, there was the Battle of Cowpens, in which the British were defeated. A small continental force under Banastre Tarleton was defeated by the wagon master, Daniel Morgan, from which Morganton, North Carolina is named, in the Battle of Cowpens in a brilliant victory. And then 2 months later, at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse here in North Carolina, the Revolutionary War, Cornwallis actually came very close to losing the battle till he decided to fire the artillery on the center of the battle.
Yeah.
And wound up winning what we call a Pyrrhic victory. Historians know as Pyrrhic victory, in that they saved the field, won the field, but he lost nearly a fourth to a third of his forces.
RG, your passion
Yeah.
for and the knowledge of, what are we doing with it today? Tell us about how the training, when you go into children and the great giving back in a special way. Tell us about that with the time we have left.
Since 1975, we, the Over Mountain Victory Trail Association, has conducted the annual March to Kings Mountain over 40 years. And what we do as a chief objective now is to get this word out to the future generations, because the story of the campaign at Kings Mountain is not really taught broadly in the textbooks as a learning lesson and as a historic lesson as well. But our role is to go out along our trail corridor, which is 330 miles long, and go into the communities and school systems and to get the word out on the story of the campaign to Kings Mountain. This past year, in our annual March to Kings Mountain, our interpretive outreach figures.
Interpretive outreach.
Which is the amount of people that heard the story through our programs we do on site and out in the field. Many of them are very colorful. We have demonstrations such as blacksmithing, marching and drilling, period music, and a lot of different kinds of colonial activities, all aimed at having the students experience the trail and essentially connect to that history. Connect to that history that's not taught in the textbooks. And this year, our outreach figures were 15,000.
15,000 youngsters.
15,000 students and teachers along 330 miles of corridor, along 4 states, North Carolina, Southwest Virginia, Tennessee, and in Northwest South Carolina.
Yeah, wow.
So we're proud of that. And we are the Friends Group of the National Park Service. And we're in a cooperative agreement with the National Park Service to do that. But we have over 70 volunteers that love the story, and the enthusiasm is magnetic. And folks tend to want to come out, be a part of it, learn how to do the reenactment, to learn how to shoot the rifles, to learn how to talk about such things as period clothing, the manufacture of that, colonial cooking. There's so many facets of the story that are within themselves are excellent little micro stories and micro lessons that you can teach students. So it's really an exciting part, and to be able to help people connect with that history, to me, makes it all worth it.
Locally, you're involved in our wonderful Greenway here.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
I'm the executive director of the Yadkin River Greenway. It's my day job, as many of us volunteers on the trail have day jobs and work other careers. And we actually have 8.2 miles of the Yadkin River Greenway project on the ground completed. We started it in 1992 as an organization. And by 2001, we built our first section of the Yadkin River Greenway, about 1.6 mile section, which happens to be in historic Mulberry Fields we talked about.
Yeah.
So we also are partners with the National Park Service, and it seems like when we can all partner together with the federal agencies, local entities like the 2 towns, Wilkesboro, North Wilkesboro, the county of Wilkes, and now we're working with Surry County, Dr. Blackley's group, with trails there and what they're doing to take EVTA.
Amazing.
It's amazing.
What?
And so trails are a way that we can make something good happen in our communities, how we can get involved. We can go out and maybe rake or take a shovel, or in my case, tell a story to kids.
Tell a story.
So there's a lot of ways that you can become involved, and to me, it's
contributions
good.
are accepted.
Yes, contributions are accepted. We're always looking ways to strengthen our mission and our ability to get the word out.
So you're a nonprofit.
We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and for more information on the OVTA, just go to simply ovta.org, or you can Google us. You can find us on Facebook. We have a couple of interesting sites out there. We have the ovta.events on our Facebook page, or you can simply just Google or Facebook search over Mountain Victory Trail Association.
Do you continue to learn?
Oh, I do. There's so many sub-stories within the big story. And here's a story that I learned recently about Samuel Johnson, Lieutenant Samuel Johnson of Wilkes County. He was wounded in the battle at Kings Mountain. He was hit 7 times and survived the battle. Well, recently I started doing first-person interpretation on Lieutenant Samuel Johnson.
So you tell his story?
Actually tell his story as if I were in the battle, retracing the old documents. And that's really fun.
Wow.
So there's so many different side stories that I could just see. I could see multiple films and movies and documentaries made on this compelling story, the campaign to Kings Mountain.
You told me that you're a North Carolina State graduate.
Yes.
And you're a musician.
Yes.
Tell us about how do you meld the music with the trails? Tell us about that.
Yes, I'm a musician, and a program I've been doing the last few years is teaching colonial barn dance. And I'll get the kids out, have them get in line or in a circle, and we'll work through a few of the rotations. The tricky part is playing the fiddle and calling the dance at the same time. But I've learned how to do that some. And that was a challenge to me, but that's an activity. We try to make these activities out on our field day events hands-on, so the students can actually get to do something, and that they learn that the sticking power of the learning experience is better than if they just hear a lecture on it.
What do children want to know?
The questions they ask include the big ones is our period dress. Where did it come from? How did they make it? Why did they wear what they did? There's practical reasons for that, but they love seeing the historians clad in their period outfits. And that's probably the biggest right there. And of course, they ask about the weaponry, whether it's the throwing axe or the tomahawk, or the throwing knife or the tomahawk, or the Pennsylvania rifles. They ask about a lot of the accoutrements, pieces of equipment that were used in the 18th century. And so we've had a number of students go on and become history majors because they were interested in this.
That influence.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we've seen that happen.
We're close to the end.
Yes.
What an exciting moment for Wilkes Communications and RiverStreet and WIFM. Share the enrichment that comes with giving like you do in a special way. How it makes us feel good about mattering in the lives of others as we end.
What we have discovered in working with students out there is that we find what we call teachable moments. And teachable moments are maybe when that youngster comes up, they have a gleam in their eye, they ask a question, this sparks a fire. And they take that experience and maybe go on and write a paper or draw a picture. Or they take it and they take that inspiration and they go find more about their historic past. And they become better students because of a fire that you help rekindle or ignite. So to me, that's what's exciting about it.
So your life is enriched and that you give it back in a special way and you love every second of it too. I can tell that. So thank you for honoring WIFM and RiverStreet and Wilkes Communications, and we hope you'll come back again.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.